everybody, and welcome back to Becoming Branches. My name's Adam Cook. With me, always, my buddy.
We're having a good time. I am Pastor Dustin McKinney. Let me just take over this because words are hard.
Speaking of butter, look what I got you.
He's just raising the stakes, ladies and gentlemen. Now, at least this, it would take me some time to make.
Do you like graham crackers?
I do.
And s'mores?
Ooh, s'mores.
So you notice that the Reese's is gone. So
was not eaten by me, just so we're all clear.
We're talking about discipline, spiritual discipline, physical discipline, and I know that you say words are hard, but I've already just train wrecked.
You've word vomited all over this place.
I've word vomited. So we were talking about prayer, and please continue to talk about prayer.
Okay, bossy. You did say please, though.
I did.
So yeah, we were talking about prayer, and we were talking about how we are really terrible at it most of the time, which is why it's a discipline. We have to discipline our minds. We can get better at prayer, and not that there's a right or a wrong prayer, though Jesus gives us amazing guidance in the Sermon on the Mount. So when we look at prayer, I'm gonna dive right in to a quote from Richard Foster.
Okay.
This is what he says. He says, "Prayer is the central avenue, so the main avenue God uses to transform us." This is really good, this next part, because it's so true in my life. If we are unwilling to change, we will abandon prayer as a noticeable characteristic of our lives. So when I do not, if there's something in my life that I know I need to change, or there's something in my life that I know has to get better, but I really don't want it to, I stop praying. Because I know when I'm in prayer, I'm going to be convicted by it.
That's good. Yeah, I've thought about it like that.
And so I didn't notice it until I read this book. And I was like, that is so me. When there's something I'm struggling with, I will, and I don't want to fix it. I don't want to change it because for whatever reason, I want this thing more than I do righteousness. I will start to shelf my prayer life. Because
just in that area or in totality? In
totality, because I know when I go before the throne, right, God is light. And that conviction comes, and he's going to cast the light on that. And and then I'm going to go and ask God for something and be like, but I want to keep doing this other thing. So it's a hard place to be. And so that really hit home.
No, that's good. I've been in those places where you could name something you shouldn't do. You do X, Y, or Z, whatever. And then you immediately are in a place of prayer. Like, well, how am I going to come to God?
Right.
It was me!
Now, it's like, I can't come to you, Lord. Jesus is like, I've seen everything you've done.
Right.
I always
so we
see
can come boldly before the throne
That's
of grace.
right.
Even though
so if you're in a sin or you're struggling with maybe an addiction or a struggling sin and you're like, well, I can't. Yes, you can.
You can.
Jesus has already seen it. He already knows it, and he still chose the cross.
Yep.
So just an encouraging shout out there, because I've been there so many times of like, oh Lord, I can't even pray right now. That's a good quote, because you're right. You're like, I'm not going to pray right now because
and because if we did, and we truly went to him and earnestly and with this, God, I want to chase after you, he will transform our hearts. And so when he says prayer is the essential avenue God uses to transform us, I agree with that. When we are in fellowship with Christ and we are in his presence and we're seeking communion with him, that light is going to start to expose the things that are in darkness. It's going to start to deal with us, and we're going to tap into his power and his strength to overcome those things instead of us relying on our own strength, which we already know. You put a plate full of cookies in front of us, in my own strength, I'm going to eat them. So I thought that was really powerful.
Absolutely, that was good.
But to continue on with prayer, have you ever prayed, say you're praying for somebody or who's sick, and if you will it, Lord, allow them to feel better. I pray this way all the time.
Yes, and that's a complicated issue.
It is.
And I want to,
unpack it.
We can unpack it a little bit. And unfortunately, I've got a scenario about this. It's kind of a deep topic, but we're gonna go in together.
Okay, here we go.
And I don't mean to make it a darker, deeper thing.
He does.
So I do sit down. My cousin and his wife were going through a situation, and they had a child that was a premature child, and we were notified of this child, and my wife and I went up there, and we were in the hospital, and we prayed over this child. I felt so good about this prayer over this child. I felt a peace about that prayer over this child, and the child didn't make it. And it was the most devastating news to hear, not only from my cousin who was just crushed, and his wife who just lost their son, but it was like, Lord, what happened? I prayed for this child. We laid hands on this. I felt a peace over this. And then it went this way. And I was like, what? And I felt just empty. I almost felt mad. I felt mad. And just like, what? And I was just at this crossroads of this, where do I go from here? And it took me months to pray again, just to pray again. And I don't know if you've been in a similar situation where you might be thinking, I don't want to talk about prayer because I prayed for this family member and this happened, or I prayed for this and this didn't happen. I want to tell you, God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts, and He knows and we don't. Right. And we have to trust that God has a plan, and He does. And it's difficult, Dustin. That is a hard thing to be in.
And that's why we're going to talk about this, because we do not want to make the mistake of offering a simple answer to a very complex issue and a complex idea. Because there are theologians who study the God's word who don't agree on God's sovereignty and free will, and where does it stop? Where does it end? And so we're gonna explore this topic a little bit today. But we're not gonna sit here and say this is the absolute correct thing. I have some thoughts on it. I have some thoughts of others who have studied, because we can genuinely want God's will to be done. So for me, when I hear someone say, "Lord, if it be your will," to me, I'm not taken back by that, because that's what I want too. I want God's will to be done. I want this person. Let's say it's a sick kid. I want my kid to feel better. There may be something that God is teaching them through that sickness, through having to persevere and to trust that I'm not seeing.
Right.
And it is far better if they struggle through that sickness.
Right.
And so to genuinely say, God, I trust you and I want your will to be done. So if you're listening and you say, Lord, if you will it, don't think that we're coming down on you, because we want that too. We want the Lord's will to be done. I think, so Richard Foster brings this up in his book. And it's interesting. He says, you never see Jesus use that term when he prays. You never see, Lord, if you will it. Now you hear, not my will, but your will be done. And he said, Jesus spent time with the Father, and because he spent time, he often knew what God's will was. And then he prayed for that to happen. And so I think oftentimes we might pray like this because we are shooting off the cuff, because we're not spending any time with God. We're not spending time to listen for his direction and his spirit to lead us to know how to pray. And I think maybe if we did that a little bit more, we could start to pray and start to know a little bit more about what God is willing in a situation. That's the point that he makes. I think it's a valid one. I can't say I've had a lot of time exercising that practice, but it's an interesting thought. It's an interesting thought of, do I need to take some time here first to seek wisdom on what God's will is? Or do I need to seek time being in His Word, because He's already revealed His will. He's revealed His will to us in many situations already that we're going to come into contact with. So I thought that was really good. And you mentioned when you prayed that prayer and things didn't work out. It probably was not necessarily that you didn't believe that God could heal that person, that child. And we see this happen in the Bible where Jesus says, your faith has made you well.
Right. A lot of times you've seen that.
Yeah, and so I think sometimes too this phrase is used as, well, just in case this doesn't happen. It's kind of like gives me a safety net.
That's exactly what it is. And I was going to say that they tagged that on at the end of that exact thing, a safety net. You couldn't. That's absolutely what it is.
Yeah. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, that's because you have a lack of faith. Well, no one knows the thoughts of a man except that man. But if I were generalizing it, sometimes I think that phrase can be used in that way, not because I'm really seeking God's will, but because I need a safety net in case it doesn't happen.
Exactly.
So I think that's an interesting point that he brings. But another point that he brought up that I thought was really good is that not people, when they pray for something and it doesn't happen, it's not that they didn't necessarily believe that it couldn't happen or didn't believe in it or didn't have faith, but they lacked the compassion for that person. So you see Jesus, Scripture will say that He had compassion on them. Jesus wept over Jerusalem. And so obviously Jesus believes, right? He has the authority over whatever He's praying. And so he believes that what He prays can happen. But He also has this compassion, this deep love and care for the people that He's praying for. And often when I thought about that, I was like, yes, I believe God can do anything He wants. Mm-hmm. But there's sometimes that I'm praying for people, and I'm like, I don't know if I hope it gets better, but if it doesn't, no skin off my nose. And so I thought that was an interesting point. Like I said, that is an opinion that he shared. I thought it just made me pause and think.
Yeah, that's good.
So it was interesting. But,
yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked about meditation. We've talked about prayer. I want to get into one that's really, really tough. And I would say a lot of believers may have tried it once or twice in their life. But I think there's a large portion of people in church who have not done this just because it's not a common practice, and that is fasting.
Wait a minute. That's where you don't eat food?
Yes. Yeah, you got it exactly right.
No, I've not done that. Now, listen, do I need to? Probably. Here's what I'm super encouraged about, and you're going to be super encouraged about. Fasting doesn't have to be food.
Right.
Fasting does not have to be food, because when I was younger and I was newer in the faith, I thought fasting was food. Mm-hmm. I just thought that's what it was. And, I'm going to fast. I'm going to pray. I'm going to fast and fast. I'm like, yeah, I love tacos and I love to eat. And so fasting is one of those things where it was really difficult for me to grasp not eating. But fasting is a fast from things that are taking time or priority in your life. Fasting can be shutting off your phone. Have you ever fasted from your phone recently?
Not recently, but I have before.
It's really hard.
It was very hard.
Really, really hard. Harder than I absolutely thought it was going to be.
So can I read this quote real quick? Because this is a great segue to this book. It says, more than any other discipline, fasting reveals the things that control us.
Exactly. So you're, the phone's in your hand probably right now, or you're watching on a device probably right now, and it's hard to shut that off. So I would encourage you, as we keep talking about prayer and keep talking about fasting and the disciplines, really focus on what is controlling me and make a list. And I would encourage you, as I'm encouraging you and I, Dustin, to maybe fast from the top 2 or 3. And there's a lot more we're going to talk about, guys. And if you stick with us, guys, this is going to be a little bit more than a trilogy. I know we do trilogies.
Yeah,
this is deep. This is deep.
It's deep.
So grab some snacks and join us next time. We'll see you later.
Counterproductive.